Welcome back, everyone. Let's keep going with our trade policies in promoting economic development. Last time we looked at import substitution and export promotion. Now we're going to look at three more, and apologies for the very busy board, but this gives you a really good idea of all the arguments for and against the next three policies we're going to look at. And lots of essay questions come on these kind of topics, so to have a board as detailed as this is actually quite beneficial. We're going to start by looking at the Washington Consensus, basically policies that involve freeing up markets. We'll then look at free trade agreements and preferential trade agreements. We'll then look at diversification as a policy as well. So let's start with the Washington Consensus. The Washington Consensus was a big grouping of 10 policies set by the World Bank, the IMF and others to essentially open up markets to allow markets to work freely without any interference from governments whatsoever. The idea was to promote fiscal discipline, so reduce government spending in the economy, control over budget deficits, control over debts in the economy. It was also to promote market liberalisation, promote deregulation, promote privatisation of industries where possible, and also, most important, promote trade liberalisation as well. So reduce protectionist measures that you might have in your economy. Allow exchange rates to run freely instead of being manipulated by governments. Reduce any non-tariff barriers you may be having in your economy. So basically open up trade as free as possible. Let the exploitation of comparative advantage take place. Let countries specialise where they have gains. So the benefits of this in theory were that by freeing up markets and not allowing the governments to intervene, there will be a better allocation of resources. There will be a lesser chance of market failure, and as a result, there will be sustainable growth and development in the long run. By attaining allocative efficiency, that outcome can be attained in the long run, which is actually good for the whole economy, allowing markets to allocate resources efficiently. It would also promote macroeconomic stability, and there are lots of benefits to that. If markets are allowed to run freely without manipulation by the government, then it's going to promote investment. If people are more, they're more confident in the economic climate now. They're more confident in forecasting to the future, knowing that the macroeconomic climate is going to be more stable. It will promote more foreign direct investment as well, and all of that put together will lead to higher incomes, higher jobs, and a better macroeconomic framework for the developing country, in theory. And although pursuers of the Washington Consensus agreed that in the short term there may be income inequality, they argued that there will be a trickle-down effect where those that do have the wealth will spend in areas where those that are less wealthy will produce, therefore generating incomes for those that are less wealthy, thus reducing the problems of income inequality in the long run. They argued that in the long run, the benefits of free markets will benefit all, not just a few at the top. However, issues with free market policies like this is that actually it's led to more poverty creation. Where has that come from? It's come from MNCs essentially entering markets where regulation is low, entering markets where there are less laws about working conditions, less laws about wages that need to be paid to staff. They've come in and exploited the advantage available to them. They've exploited their workers, paying very, very low wages. They've exploited workers in terms of making them work in very unfair, unhygienic, poor working conditions. And all that's done is lead to more poverty. It's led to greater income inequality as well, which is not a good thing. MNCs have also destroyed local environments as well, and have created market failures in areas where initially policymakers didn't really foresee that taking place. Also, people have argued that fiscal cuts, so cuts in government spending, have taken place in key areas that would promote development, like healthcare and education. By promoting fiscal discipline, the intentions might be great, but in the short term, there are major development consequences as a result of that. Underdeveloped health and education systems. So moving away from the Washington Consensus towards bilateral trade agreements and preferential trade agreements, basically encouraging regional integration. Just like the EU, encourage integration like that. If it's not quite to that extent, maybe just between 2 or 3 countries then. But by you encouraging more free trade within certain countries, it's going to allow for more market access, it's going to allow for greater gains of specialization in trade. So by allowing more market access, there can be lower transport costs. I'll give you a good example of talks about preferential trade agreements, and that is within Africa. Africa is a vast continent, but often individual countries do not actually liaise together and operate trade freely with each other. There are often lots of maybe tariff barriers or non-tariff barriers which get in the way of trade within African countries. So by allowing PTAs within Africa, there could well be better market access and lower transport costs. By making countries more competitive as a result of this, there can be further gains for the economy. There can be greater trade gains, there can be an influx in foreign investment, there could be greater profits made, greater incomes generated, greater jobs created. At the same time, with more trade taking place, we all know more trade encourages more growth, encourages higher incomes, jobs, and therefore development in the long term too. But if you allow trade to take place more freely within certain countries, there is a risk that you fall into the traps of the coincidence of wants. Especially in Africa, if lots of African countries agree to trade freely within each other and impose tariffs on countries outside the PTA, then what it might mean is that African countries realise that what they're actually exporting is very similar. And therefore to trade with African countries is not beneficial because you can't really import something you need and you can't export something that another country will need. You're all kind of exporting and producing the same goods. So problems there. At the same time, this could well lead to an increase in costs of production. The reason why is because now having to import at higher costs from countries overseas, whatever you need from these countries overseas outside your PTA, you have to import now at a higher cost. You're imposing external trade barriers outside of your PTA, which is going to increase your costs if you're importing from those countries. The trade diversion argument. And also, there may well be greater trade barriers that have been put in place by countries overseas, which may limit your potential of exporting outside your PTA. So these are all arguments against bilateral trade agreements or PTAs. And finally, let's look at diversification. This is a policy that a lot of developing countries argue is necessary to get away from agricultural dependence, to move away from that towards long-term sustainable approaches to growth and development. Diversification, very simply, is all about moving away from primary product dependence and trying to develop a manufacturing base, trying to advance technology to ensure that greater avenues of growth can be generated. So what are the benefits of that? Well, you move away from the resource curse arguments of exporting primary goods. And alongside the resource curse arguments, you have the fluctuating prices of primary products, which could well hinder long-term economic development. So you move away from that, which is a good thing. At the same time, by promoting new technology, by exporting more varied goods and services, you open up greater chance for profits to be made, greater chances of income creation and job creation as well. So more avenues for growth have been opened up, which is very beneficial too. At the same time, it's going to promote more skills in your workforce. It's going to promote your workers not just to be sufficient with low-level skills, but you're going to stretch them to be as productive as possible, to generate skills which are useful in technology-based industries, which again is great for the long-term productivity and productive potential of the economy. However, problems with this, tariff escalation is a major issue. So to compete and to be competitive, even though finished products tend to have much higher tariffs associated with them, it's going to be difficult. It's going to make the incentives favour the production of primary products instead of manufactured finished products. So tariffs tend to be lower on primary products than they are on finished products, and that can reduce competitiveness of countries who try and produce manufactured goods. Having to deal with higher tariffs would reduce their competitiveness. And where does this highly skilled workforce come from? You need highly skilled workers, but if your country's got a poor education system, if the education infrastructure is not good enough to support the kind of workers you need, then again, this may not be a viable solution in the long term if you can't guarantee workers in these industries. Okay, so these are all the different trade policies. Now we've covered them all. Again, lots of essay questions on these topics, so learn this all well. Very detailed stuff here. And hopefully you'll be able to ace an essay if it came up. Thanks for watching. See you all next time.